Mirror's Edge is one of those titles I initially had my eye on when it first was being shown off in the end of 2007, mid-2008, and mysteriously lost my interest towards its initial release in October of 2008. Then I saw it on the retail shelf for about $20 after a year had gone by, so I gave it a try, and basically here's my review on it. Mirror's Edge was released in 2008. This was the year where EA decided to actually release some new and unique IPs instead of being that studio that releases Madden every year. The basic gist of this game is a free-roaming parkour-type platformer in the first-person perspective, which I initially had my doubts on based on the fact that this could get dizzying very, very, very quickly. And that's basically the entire process of this game. There's no upgrades, there's nothing to really add, it's just you running and there's a lot of platforming. So, in other words, the gameplay can be considered basically this. Run, bitch! Frickin' run! Continue running! Look, there's a pole! Climb it! Run! Run! Frickin' run! Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Continue running! Keep running! Run, run, run! And yeah, that's basically all you'll be doing the entire game. Very simple platforming challenges with very, very disorienting first-person parkouring. The story of this game follows a young woman named Faith, who's part of a group of things called runners, which deliver illegal packages since security is so tight. They just run along the rooftops or the sewers or whatever to get the packages across. Unfortunately, this premise is immediately dropped, as basically it's just used to set up what Faith is. And basically, the plot summary goes like this. There's these riot things that were never really specifically told about, and then Faith ran away from her home because of the riots, but we're never really told why. I guess it's something to do with her mother, and she just ran away. Then she got picked up by this one guy and became a runner for the rest of her life, even though we're not really explaining why she wanted to do it. So basically, she's just a runner, and then there's this mayor guy who gets killed for some reason, we're not really told why. Then her sister gets framed, who's a police officer. We don't know why she's a police officer or why she's getting framed for this. They just say they wanted a cop to be framed, which makes no sense. So then, of course, we go through a whole bunch of levels, not really going anywhere, and then suddenly we reveal the big conspiracy behind this whole mess. The cops are learning parkour! The horror! So as you can tell, the story kind of really doesn't exist. It sort of sets up in the beginning to basically get the plot moving, although you quickly realize there isn't much plot. If there was much more focus on the plot, there'd be a lot more transitions instead of running everywhere, rather than, I guess, kind of leaving things up in the open every single level. Unfortunately, this is one of the things I don't like about the story. There's enough here, story-wise, to make me interested, but there's not really anything going in depth. So ultimately, I have to kind of say the story kind of fails, but you're not really focused on that in the individual levels. The gameplay itself is good, although it is not really polished to say it is a very great game. EA decided to put in this idea called runner vision, where things will turn red as you become close to them, to basically tell you this can be interacted with, or this will help you go in the right way. Unfortunately, they do not use this enough towards the later levels, specifically the fact that you have to be right next to something for something to turn red, in which you really don't see it far away, so you end up getting so lost in some of these levels. The other trick they try to use to help make it a bit easier to navigate is the camera change. By pressing the circle button or whatever button you use on the 360 controller, Faith will just look in the direction you're supposed to go. Unfortunately, this also is not used to its utmost extent. It basically just kind of points you in the general direction, like go to this building or go to this spot in the room, but it doesn't really tell you how to get there, what you're supposed to do, when you get there, etc., etc. The navigation is a bit wonky, but the platforming itself is very solid. If it were a bit more Prince of Persia-like, and where the levels are designed around the platforming rather than trying to be, I guess, realistic places, it'd be a bit more smooth, at least for initial playthroughs. Once you get going and learn the level layouts, you can breeze through this game very, very quickly, which is the point. So at least some very impressive speedruns, especially record times on YouTube, which are very, very, very good. The other aspect of the gameplay is that they added a combat system that revolves around fighting rather than shooting. While this seems like a good idea in practice, the controls for the fighting are not very well implemented. You are more or less a 5.5-foot tall skinny Asian girl against very well armed, trained soldiers. Ultimately, your first time playing through the game, even on the easiest difficulty, you will get killed over and over by these guys because, frankly, you don't know the way you're supposed to go, and the best option is to run. Luckily, you can knock one guy out, take their gun, and then just use it to wipe the guys out, and it's basically how you're going to end up playing this game the first couple of times. Once you learn the level layouts, you will know the correct way to go and just run right past them, which I suppose was the idea, but it was not implemented anywhere near as well as I think they were hoping. Moving on from the actual gameplay, the environments are very well rendered. It's an actual future that looks like the future rather than the bleak dystopian stuff we've been getting the last about 10 years or so. It's very, very white, it's very, very bright with a lot of singular colors to help map the area out. Basically, it's kind of imagine the world run by Apple. It doesn't mean you're going to be outside all the time. You're also going to be in very dimly lit areas, which these could have been better because there are some sections you just have no idea of where you're supposed to go. It's not the end of the world. The graphics themselves are very, very well done. The character models themselves are a bit rusty, kind of bland around the edges, but the environments themselves look very, very nice. Especially on a high-definition television where it can actually, it seemed very crisp. I've looked at this on a standard def television, it doesn't look anywhere near as good. The soundtrack is very subdued, it is very minimalistic in that you don't really hear it a whole lot. You hear it more towards the end of the game where you're more isolated in certain sections of buildings, so it feels kind of more like a jungle platformer rather than a free-roaming type thing. But the soundtrack is good, and of course it has that Still Alive song, which is actually fairly good for an actual theme for a game, even if it doesn't really fit in with the game's meaning a whole lot. All in all, I did like this game. There's enough here, me as a platforming nut, to keep me interested in playing through it a few more times to learn the level layouts and get that rush of having a perfect run, I guess. Ultimately, if you're not a platforming fan or not interested in anything new, this will not keep your interest or will not really pique your radar. There are some basic problems with it, such as navigation, the combat, and the lack of real story to get us interested in the characters. However, I think there's enough here worth salvaging. There is a masterpiece in here. I think EA DICE just needs to take a look at the game, read some of the complaints or what people didn't like, take them to heart, and design a game more around that. Whenever you try anything experimental, it's going to come out kind of iffy, mostly because people don't really know how to react or how to play it. Even at its best, it's still kind of clunky in a lot of areas, but there's enough here worth mentioning, and if you're interested in something different, I would definitely give Mirror's Edge a look. I don't like the score systems on this sort of rambling style of reviews in mind, but I would give it somewhere around a 6.5 out of 10, because there's enough things good here, but there's a lot of bad things as well, so it's kind of middle of the road in terms of actual gameplay.